Our next panelist can come up, is around collaborating for landscape conservation. I think you've noticed through our sessions, Dewi, there, that there's been a big theme around supply chains and a big theme around collaboration. So I'm really pleased to bring up to the stage Dewi Bramono. Close?
Yes.
Bramono, okay. The Deputy Director of Sustainability and Stakeholder Engagement at Asia Pulp and Paper, and Mark Buckley, Vice President of Environmental Affairs for Staples. Although today, Mark is here in a very different aspect, right? So Mark is on the stage today as a member of the advisory board for the Bellantera Foundation. So, Mark, I'd like to kick off. Just tell us, what is the Bellantera Foundation?
Yeah, well, the Bellantera Foundation is a nonprofit that was set up as a result of the long-term forest conservation policy and programs of Asia Pulp and Paper, and very aggressive goal to restore and conserve 1 million hectares of peatland forest in Indonesia. 10 different projects, and for me, it was an opportunity to get actively involved as part of the advisory board, one of 3 boards that the Bellantera Foundation has in place today. And on the advisory board, we have other representatives from other companies around the world that have very strong concerns around forest conservation in their supply chains, as well as NGOs and wildlife conservation specialists, et cetera. So a very, very diverse group. So for me personally, as a biologist, this is kind of, I'm a little bit of a wonk in this, and so for me, it's really, it's a great opportunity for me to see what's going on firsthand on the ground in Indonesia these days.
Okay, you already surprised me. You're a biologist by training?
I am.
We'll have to have that conversation later as to how do you get into this profession. Dewi, before we get into the projects and the work of the foundation, I'm not sure everyone here knows about Asia Pulp and Paper, so can you just give them a little bit of an overview?
Sure. So Asia Pulp and Paper, or APP, is one pulp and paper company that is started in Indonesia. We have a production capacity facilities in Indonesia and in China, and we source quite a lot of our raw material, which is the wood chips, from plantation forests in Indonesia. So Mark mentioned before, that's one of our commitment. It started with our forest conservation policy to eliminate deforestation across our supply chain. And when we are embarking on that process, we realized that when you do conservation, you cannot do it alone because it's a very complex and difficult project. You need to have other stakeholders to be involved, and you have to kind of look at it from a landscape perspective and not be focused only within your administration boundaries of the supply chain.
I know that in the United States, when we look at forestry companies, it's actually a lot of smallholders and not a monolithic company as we think some of these are. Is that the same case for APP?
In Indonesia, for the plantation, industrial plantation forest, basically the land is owned by the government, unlike in Europe or in the US, where it's actually privately owned. And private companies get licenses for concessions for 40 up to 100 years to manage into a production forest area.
So tell me, how did APP get involved or help start the Bellantera Foundation?
As I mentioned before, we realized that for conservation to be sustainable for a long term, you need to engage other stakeholders, and it has to be from landscape level. So that's why we need to coordinate. We need to have a platform to engage all of these people and coordinate all of our activities in conservation, and that's why Bellantera was founded. So it's, even though APP providing the seed money for its startup, basically the foundation is independent. Like Mark mentioned, it has multi-layer board members and also from different multi-stakeholders, so it runs completely independently from APP itself.
Mark, we talked in advance of this about the importance of collaboration and bringing together all of these different stakeholders. What's some advice for people? How do you bring this? First, who are the different stakeholders that you brought together, and how do you bring them together in a safe space to have a discussion like this?
Well, I mean, to be clear, we're certainly not the ones that are bringing the stakeholders together. We are one of the stakeholders, but I would say that, for those of us in the United States who over the last several years have just experienced this polarizing, I guess, inertia around getting things done, this is a refreshing alternative to see people that can respectfully disagree, sit in the same room, and talk about problems, talk about challenges, respect their ideas, and find a way forward. And quite candidly, again, as somebody who experiences what we've experienced here in the United States for the last several years, I find the process overall refreshing, and the inclusion has been terrific. So the advice I would give to folks that are out here, many of the brands here do this. I know many of my colleagues have brands that are not afraid to roll up their sleeves and really tackle some of these more difficult issues. But for us, it's a great opportunity for us to learn more, to understand how we can expand our spheres of influence. You heard that, I think, from Unilever and from Walmart earlier today. It's not just about Walmart and Unilever, but it's really how can they work with their tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers to really make a difference. And quite candidly, the only way that you do that is to really roll up your sleeves and work with folks that aren't afraid to tackle some of these really difficult issues.
And did you find that, you said you found this very refreshing. Is it a cultural issue in dealing with in Indonesia versus some of the projects in the United States?
No, I mean, I think it's just a matter of where we are in our continuum in terms of learning. And so for those of us who are in corporate sustainability, I mean, I've been with Staples for 27 years and in this role for sustainability for the last 15. And 15 years ago, there were very few people in sustainability roles. And the idea of transparency 15 years ago was a little scary to most companies, and I would think that most folks in the room would agree. You want to talk about the things that we're doing well, but we don't always want to talk about the things that we're falling a little bit short on. And quite candidly, I think it's just a matter of where we are and sort of the evolutionary cycle of really engagement, transparency, and collaboration. But what we've found, and many of you have found, is I think these uncommon collaboratives where you bring different points of the view into the room help you actually build your own point of view, and develop a better understanding, and accelerate progress, I think.
Dewi, what got this started at APP? What was the initial aha moment when you decided that you needed to start the Bellantara Foundation?
Quite simply because we have this commitment for conservation and restoration, but we are not an NGO that does conservation and restoration. So we need to find partners who actually can implement this. So that's why Bellantara Foundation is important for us, because we can provide the funding, but we need to have a platform to engage those people who have the expertise and skills, and also the connection on the ground to actually implement the program itself. And in addition to that, for our perspective also, it's not just coordinating the implementation on the ground, but also to identify support from outside to help in the conservation efforts in Indonesia, because it's the tropical, I think it's one of the biggest tropical forest area in the world. And we would like to engage others. We've already worked with many of our customers to actually develop a program together with them for implementation of conservation on the ground as part of their CSR activities.
And Mark talked about the need for brands to do this. What's the role? We have a number of big brands here. Can they be involved, Dewi, with the Bellantara Foundation?
Absolutely. I mean, we're not, this is not an APP program. We established Bellantara as a separate organization for implementation of conservation in the 10 priority landscape in Indonesia. And we would like to have further support because, as I mentioned before, conservation is a significant effort and it's complex and requires a lot of resources and coordination. And we are definitely open for anybody to be, if they are interested, to be part of the initiative.
Great. So did they contact the Bellantara Foundation directly?
Yes, okay. Yes. And we have some information if you want to talk to me later on.
And Mark, as a biologist and on the advisory board, it can't all be kumbaya, holding hands and agreement. What are some of the challenges that bring together this many stakeholders? What has come up as some of the challenges with that?
Well, I mean, I think the things that we're we're dealing with in Indonesia. You know, we talk about things like peatland forests and so forth. Is, you know, it's very complex. I mean, they're complex ecosystems to begin with. The hydrology is very complex. I mean, you've got, you know, peat systems that might be 60 or 70 feet, you know, deep that have been around for thousands of years. And so, you know, the work that's been done over the years to, you know, whether it's palm or other plantations to sort of drain, you know, those areas, you know, have fundamentally changed the hydrology and changed those ecosystems. So a lot of the restoration work here is going to be really critical, not only in Indonesia, but I believe in other parts of the world too. It's really a, what's exciting from my perspective is we talk a lot about sort of these sustainable business models, and sustain sort of means that we're keeping status quo. Unfortunately, as we all know, that there are certain, you know, there are certain ecosystems that have been damaged to a point where, you know, we need to actually go back in and try and restore. And this is, you know, 2.5 million acres is not an insignificant amount of, you know, land, and there are 10 different projects in what, 5 provinces, is that right?
Yeah.
You know, so it's very complex, and it's not just the you know, the environmental and the biological challenges. I mean, there are social components to this, there are economic components to it, and maybe you can talk a bit more about those.
Yeah. So that's basically correct. A lot of the issues in maintaining conservation, it's very tightly related to the livelihood of the community that lives near and inside the forested area, because typically it's in the middle of nowhere where economic opportunities are very small, so that people will still require forests or opening more land of forests to be able to improve their livelihood. So when you want to make sure that conservation is sustainable, you have to make sure that the people living in around that area has good source of income that is more friendly to the environment and the forests.
Why don't you give us an example of a project just to make it real? You know,
Sure.
What's on the ground? How are you impacting those
Sure.
people?
So one of the projects that we have in South Sumatra, we work together with several NGOs, including local and also international, the Zoological Society of London. So the focus is working with the community to protect and conserve a peatland area within their area itself, and part of it is also improving the water management, including increasing the water level through building dams, canal blocks, and obviously they need support in terms of like the the equipments, etc. But we want to make sure that they are the one who actually do this, so it becomes their own project and they feel ownership towards the program.
Great. Elaine, let's get a question from the audience.
Yeah, there's a question about circular economy in B2B retail. So Staples and also maybe Asia Paper and Pulp, I'm not sure, APP, I don't know if you guys are also involved in this, but what are you doing specifically to reduce environmental impact and do more to enable the circular economy?
Well, I could spend another 20 minutes talking about that. I won't do that. So I think, you know, I think as it relates to specifically what we're talking about today, conservation, forest land conservation, I think, you know, when Andrew was up here before talking about the elements of the circular economy, there's sort of the extracted resources, and then there are the sort of the biological component to the circular economy. And so this fits very nicely into that, you know, into that framework. So as we start to think about the impact that, you know, that we have as a large purchaser of wood and wood-based products, you know, it's very important for us to understand, you know, where that wood fiber is coming from, you know, and the impact that it has not just environmentally, but certainly socially in those communities that it impacts.
And is circular economy a phrase or something that is talked about in Indonesia?
Yes, it's starting to. But that's definitely one of the issues that we are also looking into. I mean, in addition to the concept of recycling, all that stuff, but how do you put circular economy into the economy of the community itself, so that they basically have produced impact also to the forestry and the environment as part of our program.
Yeah. Right. I think that's something that people miss a lot with circular economy, is the social impact of it and how important that is.
I was going to say the only other thing I would add is that, you know, we have very large corporate customers that have very strong commitments in this area too, and so our ability to actually convey and storytell and talk about the impact that their purchase makes as a result of where their wood and their paper products are coming from has, again, a multiplier impact in terms of overall, certainly impact from an economic standpoint, but really starts to feed into the whole notion of a larger circular economy and a larger system.
Great. Elaine, one more?
Yeah, so what are you doing to scale in terms of the replicability for the industry?
That's great. And let me just add on and sort of frame that. So what lessons can be learned from what you're doing here elsewhere in the world, to the Amazon, to the US forests? Are there things that you think are transferable that allow this to grow around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, where we get our fiber here in the United States, is primarily from small landowners, smallholders that own, say, 250 acres of land or less. And while in Indonesia, that's not necessarily the case in other parts of the world, those same community pressures and challenges, I think, exist and I think are very much the same no matter where in the world that wood fiber is coming from. So I think there's an awful lot of transferable information and certainly learnings that could go into place anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, I think the concept of landscape level conservation should be transferable everywhere and could be scaled up everywhere. It's basically identifying all the different players within the landscape and kind of working together, coordinating, so whatever the resources that you have will have a bigger and more lasting impact than just individually.
So one of our themes throughout the day, and you'll see throughout the week, is around collaboration. So are there any tips, sort of final question, any tips for how audience members can better collaborate with NGOs and communities and other stakeholders? Mark?
Yeah, I think you heard it from a number of folks today who talked a lot about language. We get together, I think, as a tribe, and we have similar conversations, and then when we walk away from here, we wonder why things don't move quite as quickly as we'd like. So I think there was some good advice given out earlier today to try and figure out what's most important to the stakeholders you're trying to influence, and then use a language that is going to be most impactful to get your point of view across, hopefully, and get them moving in the direction that we all want to move.
Dewi?
I think from my perspective, kind of look into your own supply chain. I mean, just start from there, and then you can see that there's a lot of opportunity to actually work with all the way to your second and third tier, and then identify all of those opportunities for collaboration, because I mean, that's where we have more impact, where we have that connection with it and the supply chain.
Fantastic. Well, let's thank Mark and Dewi. Thanks a lot, Mark. Dewi.